What's up, guys? Just a couple of quick notes before I get to my interview with IM Kassa Korley. Number one is we had some technical issues and the software crashed about at the end of our first interview, and somehow it only saved about the first 25 minutes. So luckily, Kassa was gracious enough to rejoin me, and he was just as informative and entertaining in the second half of the interview as the first. But if my voice sounds a little bit different, it's because I've been fighting a cold and I'm finally recovering. And when we recorded the second half 10 days later, I was on the road to recovery, but luckily it was just as good as the first one. Now, a couple other things. Number one, I finally recorded a YouTube video summarizing the survey results. Thanks to those of you who participated in the listener survey a few months back. I just wanted to respond to some common feedback I get. I shared the data about listeners and demographics and stuff like that. So it's a bit into the weeds of what goes into making this podcast. So if that's something that interests you, you can go to perpetualchesspod.com and check out the YouTube video. If it doesn't interest you, just ignore it. That's why I didn't put it on the podcast feed. Last but not least, we're doing a live event in Nashville, Tennessee for Elementary Nationals. So I just wanted to remind you all, if you're going to be there, you better holler at me. You better come attend, or at least drop me a line. Maybe we'll do a meetup or something, grab a drink or two. So if you're a parent or a coach attending Nationals, let me know. My guests are the executive director of the USCF and the Carol Meyer, along with the president of the USCF, Michael Hoffpower, in a joint interview. And then we've got two legendary chess coaches joining us, Jay Stallings, who you guys may know from a prior visit, and Sunil Weramantry, FM Sunil Weramantry, who is coached the legendary program over at Hunter and he wrote a great chess book decades ago, and then he just came out with another one that's awesome. So we're going to be talking about that. And of course, he's the stepdad of a certain Hikaru Nakamura. So I'm excited to talk to Sunil. And last but definitely not least, Grandmaster Irina Krush, 7-time U.S. Women's Chess Champion, in the trenches. We're playing another U.S. Women's Chess Championship as I record this. So super excited for all that. The plan is to release them on the podcast feed too, if the equipment cooperates and I correctly record them. So they'll be coming out sometime in May, but if you're going to be there, you should try to come by and ask some questions, check it out, say hi, all that stuff. Okay, enough jibber jabber. On to my interview with Kassa. Catch you guys later. Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Johnson, and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. On Perpetual Chess, I have weekly conversations with the chess world's best players, promoters, and educators about their lives, careers, current projects, and best practices. For more information, go to perpetualchesspod.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perpetual Chess. My guest this week is another talented young chess player, YouTube streamer, Duke graduate, and most importantly, international master, Kassa Korley. Thanks for joining us this week.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, Kassa, the way it works with guests on this show is I have a big, long list of potential guests, and sometimes I have a bunch of people lined up, and I know who it's going to be, and sometimes I don't, and then I get out the list and see what seems timely. And the way that I ended up reaching out to you is I saw that you were playing it down in Charlotte with former guests of the show and YouTube, more importantly, YouTube star John Bartholomew. And that made me think about seeing what's going on with you in your chess and how it's, because I know you had a pretty good showing down there. You didn't manage to get a norm, but I just thought we'd like to hear your story. So first, let's get the trip report. How did that tournament treat you, Kassa?
I enjoyed it. I mean, I always enjoy going down to Charlotte to see my good friend Peter Giannatos, who actually runs the Charlotte Chess Center. I have a history with him and a few other individuals at the center, including Dominique. So shout out to Dominique. And essentially, we were actually myself, Peter, Dominique, and John all in London at the London Chess Classic, and I want to say it was 2015 or 2016. And so we were all sort of hanging out during the tournament, and so we go back to then, and that's, why, rooming and stuff isn't a problem now, because we know each other pretty well.
Yeah, they're doing amazing work down there. And Peter also, I saw, was doubling as your cameraman for the little YouTube videos that you were throwing up.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been so active on YouTube the past 4 months. And I was just thinking, why not, just get like a very quick video out there. It's pretty much pretty low lift work, and it's something that I can laugh on like 10 years from now. Like a lot of times people are like, oh, what are you doing the videos for, and blah, 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 and like you should do this and you should do that. And it's like, well, first of all, like I'm doing it sort of for myself, so just sort of like to create some sort of legacy and experience and memories around what's happening now.
Yeah, and memories can be fickle things, so it's good to record how you felt at that moment, because looking back, you might have an entirely different feeling about a given tournament.
Yeah, definitely. But mostly good feelings in Charlotte. I mean, I only lost one game from 9, which is I think I'd actually never done before in a tournament, because normally I'm a pretty more volatile player. I don't accept draws, for instance. So
like at all?
Yeah, like at all.
Wow. That's interesting. That's kind of like a Jonathan Corblaw school of chess sort of thing. He doesn't resign. You don't accept draws. Well,
I just have such a disdain for the draw. I mean, I really think that, if you're going to, call chess a sport, and I mean, I actually am sort of like in the minority camp where I actually don't believe it's a sport. But if you want to call chess a sport, then it has to have, you have to have more sporting engagements every time. And I think, the draw agreement, I mean, people have spoken on this ad nauseum, but it just diminishes the quality, the image, and all that stuff of chess. And I actually think in the long run, if you are sort of conditioned to not actually offer draws, and don't get me wrong, I do accept draws, but in positions that are like relatively dead. If you're not conditioned in that way, then I think you actually become a better player, because you just sort of have this psychological edge where you're going to play through everything, and you might suffer some adversity, some losses here and there, but I think you're tougher for it.
That's interesting. So what's your threshold? If it's like a rook and 3 pawns versus rook and 3 pawns on the same side, are you taking a draw, or are you fighting on?
Oh, I mean, I would call that a dead draw position. I mean, like there's like, if there's no way to sort of unbalance it, and if they're on the same side, that's definitely like, that's just a draw. Like, so I'm not going to play out something that's dead. But if there's really any sort of imbalance, material, hope, we're going to play some moves just so, the opponent has to sort of prove it. But I wouldn't say it's in the same realm as sort of like the Corblaw playing till checkmate type thing. That's sort of, I would say, a little bit different. I'm talking about really practically speaking, almost a Carlsen-esque approach that I think you sort of learn that, people get really tired over time. And if you, just play things out, good things tend to happen. And I'm always of the belief that, I'm more athletic than my opponent and have more energy, because, I have a sports background. So I just feel like if that's actually the case, I ought to play to those advantages as much as I can.
So Kassa, the draw stuff is interesting, but I also want to hear you unpack more about why you think that chess isn't a sport, because people are always interested in that topic. And like you say, it does seem like a minority view amongst chess fans. Sure.
So, I think I understand that it is a minority view, and that, chess players are, often critical of anyone that will sort of endanger their hallowed ground. But I've just, over the years, I've had the privilege to play, like what I would consider like more the real sports. In high school, I was a 3-sport athlete: basketball, soccer, and track. But basketball's always been my main sport. Frankly, it's why I decided to go to Duke, just to be around a basketball culture. I think chess is a game with sporting qualities. But I've seen too many chess players over the years that, they don't have their athleticism, so to speak, doesn't translate off the board in any type of way. And so I think, and I've also just seen really, chess players that aren't particularly in shape. And so I think you could be a great chess player and maybe not the best in the world, but you can be a really great chess player and not necessarily be physically fit. And that's not even close to resembling the case in like basketball or soccer or football, and so on and so forth. So I just think it doesn't necessarily hold water. And I think chess in the Olympics, for instance, is like not something that makes sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on the record as being agnostic about this topic, but I mean, one thing I will say is a couple things that are considered sports, like golf or table tennis or whatever, they're not necessarily, you don't have to be in peak physical shape for that either. And the other thing is, of course, that as you sort of alluded to, the top players these days are becoming more and more physically fit. And the top guests that I've had on, like Hikaru's running mini marathons, and of course Magnus is legendary for playing basketball or soccer basically on every off day. So it's moving in that direction, although I get that doesn't change the classification of chess itself.
Sure. And I think another thing that's important to emphasize is in the other sports you cited, whether it's ping pong or golf, there is some sort of physical demonstration in the actual in the sport that's being carried out, right? So that the physical demonstration when you're playing chess is like moving the pieces is pretty much the gist of it, and then it's more of a there's other physical tolls, but it's not the same. It's not the active. It's just not the same to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I'll never change on that. I think if I didn't play, basketball, soccer, run, then I would be more inclined to hold chess so dearly as a sport. But being around other games has given me this diversity of perspective.
Nice. Yeah. And having seen your YouTube video with Outright Chess, as I mentioned to you offline, where you showed off a little bit on the basketball court, I can as a YouTube observer vouch for your abilities a little bit. It looked like you're not all talk.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, chess and basketball have been both in my life since I was 5, and I sort of applied myself in the same way. It wasn't like one necessarily took precedent over the other. And that's actually, one could say, well, maybe that's why, I'm not a grandmaster yet or something like that, or I didn't become, even a better basketball player. But I'm thankful I'm thankful that I was exposed and, engaged in different activities and had this diversity of experiences, because I think just eventually in the long run leads to a richer life.
Yeah, I agree. I know that some people like to focus more on chess. That's my personal leaning as well, as is evidenced by the wide breadth of topics we discuss on this podcast, much to a few people's dismay, but it is what it is. But I do want to get back to chess right now, Kassa. So why don't you give us like the 10,000-foot view of what's going on with your chess game? I mean, you play the Charlotte chess tournament. You've spoken in interviews in the past about your goal of becoming a grandmaster. Are you still like pushing hard for that right now, or are you kind of laying back at this moment?
So it's definitely still my goal, and it always will be my goal. Currently, I'm working a job professionally, so chess definitely has taken a back seat in terms of the opportunity to play. Chess is still sort of, it's like a drug to me. It's a very, very addictive, and I'm still very passionate about it. So I'm looking at chess every day. I think you can learn a lot about someone based on their top 5, top 10 sites that they look at. And if you ask me what are the top 5, top 10 websites that I'm browsing, or that my history Chrome will tell me I'm looking at, probably like half of those are sites with the word chess in it.
Right.
So that really says something. Even now, where I can't, even whenever I'm on a computer, I just can't help it but go to a prominent chess site and play through some games and just see what's going on, because it's just been that strong of a passion. But right now, though, I mean, I still have this goal of becoming a GM, soon, or, relatively soon. I don't want to wait, forever until I'm like 35 to get it done. Cause every year it becomes harder, I think.
And you're what, 25 now? Is that right?
I'm 24. I'll be 25 next month. I'm still clinging to 24.
Nice. Yeah.
I feel old all the time.
Good to be 24.
Yeah.
So what are you doing for work right now?
Yeah, so I work at Code Academy. It's a tech startup, you could say, that helps teach people how to code. I work on the product team there. Essentially, it's actually been my first full-time professional job. So it's been a really interesting experience being in the professional world. And yeah, chess is still just back to that other question. Like, chess is still really at the forefront for me. And most of the vacations I take, it's a chess tournament. It's not a real vacation. And then I actually come back to work, and I'm just as weary as I was before I left, because chess is such a grind.
Yeah, probably more weary.
Yeah, and for the people that are like, see, it is a sport. Like, that touche. That's at least there's an argument there.
Yeah, well, you have travel too. Like, it's only New York to Charlotte. You live in New York?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, I knew you were from there. New York to Charlotte isn't like a huge flight, but still, you feel it when you flew the day before. And yeah, definitely, it doesn't feel like you unwound if you were grinding chess all weekend. Yeah, it's serious. So, yeah, I'm still just trying to get better. I always feel like the last tournament I played, I always feel like the best player I've been is the one in the current moment, because I've learned so much from every tournament, and you just go back to the drawing board and make some little adjustments. And it was a really big deal for me to play, and just this last event, and like only lose one game. That felt really good. So I'm still working on it in my spare time, and I'm definitely going to continue to play tournaments and slowly but surely get there. But it's going to be a more gradual process than I thought, and that's sort of what I've learned over the past few years, getting a little bit more mature and understanding that is, I made a choice to go to college. I made a choice to work in the quote unquote real world, and I made a choice not to invest everything in chess, because theoretically one could consider investing everything in chess and being like a 2650 grandmaster, and still really, really struggling in the whole grand scheme of the chess world economically. So I just made I had a different path, and so I have to understand that the path to my goals will also be a little bit more drawn out. Yeah, we've had so many chess professionals of different stripes on this show, and one thing that's struck me is, first of all, big picture, I think things are better than ever for chess professionals. I think that's, to me, that's fairly unequivocal. But if you're not in the top, say, 40, 50 in the world, it isn't that big a difference if you're like 2650 FIDE versus 2400 FIDE, because your career is going to be based around doing some sort of chess education or chess presentation for the bill paying aspect of your work, and then fitting in the work on your own game around the margins. So whether you do that with teaching chess itself or in another field, as you're doing, utilizing your degree, is not just, there's obviously lots of personal preference and life goals that come into making that decision.
Yeah, and I realized that like pretty much towards the end of college. I actually took some time after school. I graduated in 2015, and I was basically playing chess for about a year or so. And that's actually when I was around my peak rating, was like 24, 30-ish. And I saw these amazing players at like tournaments like the Reykjavik Open and the London Classic. And it's like, I talked to some GMs. I'm like, what are they doing? And it's like, it's a hustle. It's a real, you have to be, you have the love for the game, so it's not like it's the worst thing in the world. You're doing this thing that you love, and you're really driven towards it. The one thing that I think about a lot is, I can't believe I'm saying this, but going back to thinking about chess players as athletes, you like if you're an NBA player and your career is probably done around like mid to late 30s, it's like, what do I do next? And at least in basketball, you might say I have like a ton of money saved up, and I have media opportunities and all this thing. If you're a chess player and you're sort of in the tail end of your career, and it might be around that similar age, and then you're like, what do I do next? I think it's actually a much harder question to answer. And so I was always like, I started to think like, well, I don't really want to have had to invested all of that in this one entity, and then basically have no idea or nowhere else to turn that was like pretty clear for me.
Right. So with regard to your current work, are you a coder yourself?
No, I actually had no coding experience before joining. I have a little bit now, but nothing to write home about. My role is basically working with the product team to help implement new features and support our platform, that sort of thing. So don't need to be an engineer to be an effective employee.
Okay. And you enjoying it so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really interesting experience. I'm really grateful for it, just to get the exposure into particularly with an industry that's like, as far as buzzwords and being relevant is concerned, like technology and startups are like, that's it. So it's just been a really eye-opening exposure to, really what I think the 21st century may very well be about, as far as tech-enabled jobs and having some coding skills and, all those things. I've been really grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's definitely a good topic to have covered on your resume.
Mm-hmm.
So getting back to chess, so you're from New York, but you're also a Danish citizen, correct?
Yeah, my dad was born in Denmark, and I've had pretty much dual citizenship as a result all my life.
And you're part of the product of the fabled Dalton chess program. Josh Waitzkin being the most famous alumni, but a rich history of successful chess players. So what was it like growing up and, playing in a program like that?
It's actually funny you mentioned that, because my connection to the Dalton chess program is probably not as clearly defined as you'd expect, because Dalton is a K to 12 private institution, and I came to this school in 8th grade, and their program is featured prominently K to 5.
Okay.
So there wasn't any, at least while I was there, infrastructure to support high school age players. So I was at Dalton, for the academics. I was in this program called Prep for Prep that helps minorities get into independent schools in the city after like doing intense preparatory work for a couple years. And by virtue of being in Prep for Prep, I got to Dalton, and it wasn't chess related at all. It just so happened that there was a chess culture in the lower school.
Oh, that's interesting. That would have never crossed my mind.
Yeah.
So were there any other chess players around your age, like, strong young chess players?
No, I mean, there was, in my year, as far as Dalton is concerned, I was class of 2011 there. And in my year, there was a player that was pretty decent, like in like K1, K2, K3. But when I was there, his chess career had dropped off, and I think his peak rating was like 1700.
Okay.
So I was pretty much solo there.
Okay, but you were pushing pretty hard, right? That explains, because I read in an interview where you said you'd never had a coach, and I was surprised, because I figured, with my not knowing all the details and the outsider view, I thought that's surprising since you were at Dalton. So the mystery is solved.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break from our interview to tell you about an awesome opportunity to work in the chess world. So you may have heard my interview with Adam Weisbarth of Silver Knights Enrichment a few weeks back. They're doing awesome work promoting chess in the DC area, exposing lots of kids to the game and helping them get better. And the good news is that they're hiring. They're looking for a program manager to be based in DC. It's a full-time salaried position with benefits where you can work in chess education management. So the primary responsibilities of the job would be for organizing and managing chess programs at groups of schools. It's office-based, although you would also be visiting some schools. So if you're interested in this job, there's a couple ways you could apply. You could go to www.indeed.com and search for Silver Knights Enrichment, or you could just send an email to jobs@skenrichment.com. That's jobs@skenrichment.com. And I'll also put a link to the job description in the description of this show. So as someone who's been in the chess world for a long time, I can tell you that opportunities to work like this with a salaried position don't come along that often. So if this sounds like something that you think you'd be a good fit for, you should drop them a line. Okay, back to the interview. And we actually got a question and some intel from a supporter of the podcast, Kare Christensen, who says, if not already mentioned by Kassa himself, he has had a spell of some years in Denmark where he played not only in the Danish team championship and some tournaments, but also in the individual Danish championship, and actually did quite well. One obvious question is, how is the Danish or European chess different from the U.S., and what did he think in general about chess life in Denmark?
Yeah, so I guess a good place to sort of start would be why I'm in Denmark so often. I have a lot of family there. I'm a dual citizen of Denmark and the U.S., and I actually spent my whole junior year in a study abroad program in Copenhagen, which gave me a real opportunity to just be there, living on my own, but also have grandparents and family there. So it's like a really transformative experience. I'd been going to Denmark every year since I was a kid, but it was a totally different thing, like coming into your own as an adult or as an adolescent, becoming an adult. So as far as the chess is concerned, when I actually was there over the course of the year, I joined a club called Ubro Chess, or OBRO. Actually, the first O has a line through it. It's a Danish vowel, but neither here nor there. Basically, I played for a Danish club. I got involved in some of the chess scene there, and yeah, it was just an opportunity to get something very different than what I was used to in American chess. Now, I mean, this is no surprise to people that have probably played in Europe before, but one of the things that immediately stands out is you don't have to bring your pieces and clocks and stuff to events anymore when you're playing in Europe. That stuff's already provided. I'm sure that's not the original thing to say, but it is something you just notice. You're like, oh my gosh, they have stuff here.
Right.
Always gets you. When these open tournaments, you sort of just have to scrap yourself.
Yeah.
That you can also point out, like the prizes are usually less than the American Opens, but they don't share prizes, which is something that they do in the U.S., where if there's like a 5-way split, they're actually going to split it. And in many European countries, they actually just have tie breaks. As far as like the chess scene is concerned, or maybe even chess culture, I would say that I found European chess to be a little bit more correct, if you will. And by correct, I think just a little bit more. Maybe the word is classical, not quite as like reckless. I would say. I'd say in American tournaments, particularly in the Opens. There's a lot of games that maybe aren't as high quality because you're playing multiple games a day, and essentially, I think the culture in the U.S. is like very much attacking style. And in Europe, you're playing a lot of players that are like not gonna like go for your throat, or at least in Denmark, this was the case. There weren't anyone that was like super aggressive, but they were going to play more measured. And I mean, I actually quite liked that approach because I mean, I'm a positional player, so it's something I enjoyed. But I always found, like, the Germanys, the Denmarks, these Western European chess countries, they're not as sort of brazen with, like, Sicilians everywhere, like you might expect. Sicilians and Grunfelds, like you might expect from American Open.
Huh, that's interesting. And of course, people could draw their own, conclusions about the broader implications, or if there are any, about like what it says about a culture in general, if one country is approaching chess with sort of reckless abandon and an emphasis on, cash prizes, and the other, you just play a game a day and you relax and you appreciate the beauty of the game. And I've only played a little bit in Europe, but that's what you say definitely rings true from my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always had this. I've had many of these discussions about, what's your impression of the chess culture here in the U.S. And I'd say it's gotten a lot better just because more people are playing chess. So, if more people are playing and the internet, it becomes this great equalizer. It sort of evens the playing field. But you still tend to notice a much more difficult adjustment for youth players in the U.S. that have been in the scholastic scene for a little bit longer than they should, and having this very narrow toolkit where they sort of sack mate, and then all of a sudden that formula isn't really working anymore. So and I think if you like grew up in like around like European chess culture, I was saying, I mean, it's not even specifically European, but a non-American chess culture might be easier to grow out of this almost initially primitive type of chess.
Yeah, it's an interesting difference for sure. So do you feel like it helped your chess necessarily playing there?
Well, I definitely had a pretty big leap while I was there. I think it was more than anything else, just an opportunity to play a little bit more, have a constant diet of chess while in college. I mean, when you're studying abroad, it's not as rigorous as your studies back at your actual school, or it definitely wasn't the same level of work that I did at Duke University. So I had a little bit more time to, really, really aggressively pursue chess. So when I had breaks, I played for Saturday once, and I basically just hung around like the Danish club, the Danish league. And most people actually that go to college, they get worse at chess. I actually got significantly better, and it's probably it has a lot to do with sort of my obsession with getting better at the time. Like, it was definitely like a priority to me, even when it maybe shouldn't always have been. But also was just the opportunity before me was really amazing to just be within like a few miles distance of like chess opportunities. Whereas playing FIDE rated games in particular in the US it's changed considerably, but I always called any FIDE rated tournament was like pretty much an $1,000 trip, and I couldn't really afford that all the time. I played maybe 4, 5, 6 tournaments a year, whereas when I was in Denmark, if I really wanted to, I could play something pretty much every month.
Yeah, and they do keep it less expensive. And for listeners who don't know, the first Saturday tournament that Kassa alluded to is these legendary FIDE-rated, norm-based tournaments in Budapest that when I was a kid, if you wanted to make a norm, there were so few opportunities in the United States that you almost had to go there. It was kind of like a rite of passage. And some players would go and live in that area and just travel to different tournaments. Now, thanks in no small part to, of course, Rex Sinkfeld and also your buddy in Charlotte, Peter Giannatos, they're doing a great job supporting events here in the U.S., and it's a bit more of a level playing field for norm chasing. But those tournaments, I mean, they're steeped in history. I would love to have had a chance to get my ass kicked in one of those sometime.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely many title players have gone there to achieve something. I definitely did not have my best tournament when I was there, but the experience it was just interesting just to see what that was like. If I go back to Denmark for a second, I think the last thing to note before I guess closing the book there would be that I actually switched federations pretty much a year or so after I got back from Denmark and was a senior at Duke. It became pretty clear that that'd be a great opportunity for me because while I was in Copenhagen, I won this tournament called the Candidate Class, and basically it's whoever wins that tournament has a spot in the Danish Championship. But I had to switch federations to be able to compete in it. And so it just made a lot of sense to switch federations, compete in the Danish Championship. And, long term, if I, did become a stronger player, maybe one day having an opportunity to play for the Olympiad. So, which is something that with the U.S. Was pretty much going to be out of the question, given the strength of the U.S. team today. Now, the Danish team is no joke either, but at least 2,500 seems more feasible than 2,700 FIDE at this point.
Right. Yeah, I did check your ranking on the Danish FIDE Danish top players list, and I was surprised. I think you were in the 20s.
Yeah, it's actually I was probably in like the teens, like very close to outside the top 10 when I right after I graduated from college, because I was at my peak I think was like 24:30, I want to say. I was just, after I came back from Denmark, I was in really great chess form, and I actually got my 3 IM norms in succession. I played in the, I think it was the New York International, and then the Philly International, and then the World Open, and just got 3 norms in a row like that. And my FIDE rating was already 2,400, so it was strange. I only had 1 norm, but a FIDE rating of 2,400 because I played a bunch of 5 and 6 round events in Copenhagen. Strangely enough, that didn't obviously give me a norm opportunity because you need 9 rounds.
So when you were on a run like that, did something feel different? Did you feel like you were in the zone?
I would just say it was really, when you get to play a lot, you start to see what works and what doesn't, and you just get this really amazing repetition, and then muscle memory and all these types of things that are really almost like sporting analogies or sporting terms come to you quite naturally. So my whole thing is I always thought I had really great talent, and that the opportunities before me to play were the main obstacle in my development. Now, I mean, I've never had a coach, and so some are like, oh, well, you need a coach to really get to that point. And I thought a coach gets you to the solution, faster than you otherwise could get there yourself, probably. But more than anything else, playing is games really has been my greatest teacher, because you constantly making adjustments.
Yeah, and in our lost tapes, in our interview that wasn't recorded, you spoke at length about how critically you sort of approach chess. So you didn't have a coach, but that made you more inclined to ask questions that other people might not ask, or at least to dig for answers, because if you have a coach and there's something you don't understand, you can ask them. But you were saying you didn't have that luxury.
Sure. I mean, I could totally dive into that methodology for a second. Basically, I didn't even have a database until like high school, and my website of choice was chessgames.com. Basically, they had this a game of the day, an opening of the day, and a player of the day. And I would look at all of those things. And then they also had this opening explorer. And what I would do is I would just look up openings that were relevant to me that I wanted to learn. And I would play over hundreds of thousands of games in the openings explorer. Now, the key thing is I actually wasn't like a premium member. Looking back on it, being a premium member didn't even cost that much for me now. But back then it seemed like money that, as a kid, I didn't really want to spend. So essentially you got sort of locked out of the opening explorer after like a certain amount of moves. It was usually like 8 or 12 or 10. But I found sort of like a workaround where you can, if you actually look at one of the games and you scroll to the bottom, there's this thing called that says find similar games, and you're able to look at all the relevant games played in the line that similar to that game. And so it was this sort of backdoor workaround where I could actually get all the games that I actually needed to learn the opening properly. And I would do this like every day, pretty much. Like I would literally flip through games with like, you look at your arrow keys. I just be hitting the right arrow key, maybe a couple hours a day, just looking at games, and really getting a sense of, what were the strong players doing? What weren't they doing? And the key thing was actually figuring out like why weren't they doing these things? Because I had all these top level games that I was looking at from all the top level tournaments. They have a tournaments tab on the left hand side of chessgames.com, and it's all the relevant tournaments, and it's just weird sort of figuring that out. There's one time in particular, I've actually sort of started a chess series last year about this called Chess Secrets You Wish You Knew. And I remember looking at this game when I was in middle school. I was playing a tournament. I was getting up and walking around. And there was this guy playing G6, like pawn G6, in a Sicilian. And it just made no sense to me. He was playing like a Scheveningen type structure. And I was like, why is he pushing a pawn near the king? And, after playing through other Sicilian games, I started to notice this being a trend. And it sort of dawned on me, maybe this G6 move is a prophylactic move. Maybe the king doesn't necessarily have to castle kingside. Maybe there's maneuvers where the bishop goes to G7. I actually did a video about the rook E8, bishop F8 maneuver. And so you sort of like, you see something long enough, you start to sort of rationalize the decision. And that was a lot of the learning process for me, is seeing something, not quite understanding it, trying to figure it out, and, losing and learning and that sort of iterative process.
Yeah, and so Kassa's talking about his YouTube channel, which you guys should definitely check out. So did you have any sort of, I know we discussed in our other interview that although you went to Dalton, which has a fabled chess tradition, by the time you got there weren't, you were older than the general chess program, than the age that the program targeted. So you didn't have many chess peers at Dalton. Did you have any other peers around New York City that you could talk chess with and study with?
Yeah, actually, I had I definitely had a few people that I played chess with that were my age growing up. The Dalton team, like you noted, was really like limited to like elementary school primarily, and then there was a few middle school types. But by the time I got there, I got to Dalton in 8th grade, and it's really, there was one guy in my grade that was a chess player, and he was like 1600, so it definitely sort of tailed off. But I had some chess peers, definitely. A friend of mine, Nitai Levy, he actually went to Bronx Science and was still very passionate about chess at the time. He was about expert level player at the time. Now he's about 2200. Raven Sturt, he still plays chess. He's an IM now as well. We sort of fallen out of touch, but in high school, we were at the Marshall like almost every weekend, just playing tournaments, going over our games, talking about things. It did sometimes seem sort of like isolated, I guess, the development did, because you want to get better, but you also don't want to like exchange all these trade secrets essentially that
right.
You're trying to work on. I think most of the learning and communication happened in the games, in the actual action. And that, again, I cannot emphasize enough how valuable that those experiences have been, because for me, chess always had this amazing ability to give me profound joy and profound pain. So every game, especially that time, looking back on it, I just poured so much of myself into it, and I took the results. I received the results as they were. So if it was a win, I was like the happiest guy in the world, and if it was a loss, I sometimes did question, like, why is I doing all this? Was it even worth it? Like, what's the point? And you have these just amazing moments when you're playing chess where it can do that to you, like a drug, frankly. I like to consider chess to be one of has very many sort of addictive drug-like qualities.
Yeah, for sure. I think every listener will be able to relate to that. I definitely can. And it's funny, now I'm 41 and I have kids, and I used to be fiercely competitive when I played. And now when I play a game, I can still get to that sort of feeling of heightened awareness, and feeling of disproportionate importance of what happens in one game. But what I've noticed has changed as I've gotten older and gotten a little more perspective is the feeling goes away faster. So I still have the same intensity and the same, especially same, I'm still really bothered when I lose, especially if it's due to something that I feel like I had some control over. But at least I'm able to recover more quickly with the benefit of some maturity.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually probably going to write about this one day, because it's really funny if you're playing if you're playing blitz, particularly, like if you're playing like blitz in a park or something like that. And, there might be these other things that you would notice if you weren't just totally consumed by the game. Like whenever I play blitz for like several hours, I'm just like in this zone. You're just sort of like, you're almost not in your body totally. And then when you're done, you have these sensations come back into you that you sort of forgot. Like, oh, I actually have to use the bathroom. Or,
right.
Oh, I'm hungry. I haven't eaten in 6 hours. And it's amazing how all this sort of like once you sort of snap out of the trance, life becomes clarifying again. Honestly, it's almost like post-coital. Like it's just something comes back to you that you did not have before. And that's like the beauty in it, to be so engrossed, but also, a curse. More beauty though, but
yeah, mostly good.
One thing I actually would also note is, we about this winning and losing. I came to this sort of realization or epiphany, and it really sort of helped to put things in perspective for me. And that's like, if you're, a player that's been playing for a while, and, has a pretty decent experience with the game, it's very likely you win more games than you lose. So in my case, I don't know what it is, but probably like 70, 80% of the time, I'm winning the games that I'm playing, or definitely not losing them. And what that means is that 70% of the time or 80% of the time, I'm inflicting this pain or questioning on someone else and only receiving it 20% of the time. How humbling is that?
Right.
That, you inflict that sort of, they're in it and probably have the same sort of feelings and values you do as well. How crazy is that? You get that feeling so much less than you dish it out. I just think it's an incredibly humbling thing to recognize.
Yeah, and in that sense, in terms of like the emotional impact, excuse me, I guess it would be a negative sum game, because winning never feels as good as losing, and someone's going to lose for the most part. So the net suffering is always negative in a given chess game, but nevertheless, it's fun.
Yeah. Something about you just want to come back, and that's the other thing is there's always why do you come back? Why do people come back? They come back because of the potential energy behind, what it can give you. They come back because that feeling really does mean something powerful.
Yeah. And I mentioned this last week's guest, Dan Lucas, mentioned that I wrote one of these best move columns for Chess Life several months ago, probably 6 months ago. But I mentioned that, in this age of distraction with cell phones and all that stuff, like the fact that I have to turn my phone off when I play chess, like a tournament game, to me, that's like a huge boon. Like, it's like, all right, finally an excuse to like get this thing away from me and like, form longer thoughts than I do when I'm just like checking Twitter and stuff like that.
Yeah, an opportunity to be present.
Yeah, exactly.
To hear your breathing and other people's breathing, to sometimes, unfortunately, smell unpleasant smells.
Yeah, that's true. Although that's gotten better with chess too, I think.
Yeah, for sure. But yet to be totally engrossed. It's something else.
Yeah. So Kassa, you've mentioned in previous interviews, I read an interview that you did with Daim Shabazz on Chess Drum, and your long-term goal, you've been vocal, is to become a grandmaster. Now you're working full time too. So how's that shaping up? How are you going to attack this problem?
Yeah, sure. I think the goal sort of evolves. And what I mean by that is that the timeline, frankly, evolves. I think when I was, 10, I wanted to be a GM at 15. And then when I was 15, I said 18. And 18, I said 21. And, out of college, I was like, well, I'm probably going to start working. So let's say, 26, 27. I think I'll get there because the passion and addiction, frankly, though it's relatively dormant, comes back in waves.
Right. Said.
And basically the opportunities before me now lie in time off. So I've been working now for about a year and a half, and I haven't been playing too much chess, but believe it or not, every break I've taken off since I started working has been to play chess, which is maybe a little bit sad, but it goes to show you how much I care. I recognize now that, frankly, the ambition to become a GM isn't just about me. It's something I hold very dear, but I do sort of want to show that there are other ways to get this done. If you have the fortitude and the drive and all those things, particularly as an African American. I mean, Maurice Ashley is, one guy, and there should be more. I think definitely my path, sort of going it alone is one, that I just want to show is possible, really. I'm not looking at chess every single day anymore. It's most days still, like 90% of days, definitely. Like, so it's usually still I'm looking at, flicking through games or not. Chessgames.com has been a little bit replaced by Chess Bomb or Follow Chess, this app I have on my phone. But just looking at the games are still there, and it's sort of like a dream deferred.
Yeah, I think, again, a lot of people can relate to that. I mean, life gets in the way at times. Although I guess one benefit of actually working now is if you could probably set aside enough money to get the occasional lesson. So having made it this far without a coach, do you have any thoughts of like reaching out to some GM on Skype and having them help you push for the next level?
Honestly, no. I mean, maybe it's a tinge of stubbornness or something like that, but I'm making adjustments on my own and they're working. My last tournament was I only lost one game in a 9-round event, like with IMs and GMs. So, the stuff is working. It's the opportunities to play that still become the persistent challenge. I think, when I was younger, I had a lot of time and not a lot of money, and now the situation is reversed where I have the money to play when I want to, but not enough time. So the aim is really to find some sort of happy equilibrium. It might be the next time I'm in between jobs, or I really give myself like a year to really go at it. But I feel very confident about my ability to make adjustments and about my ceiling, frankly, as a chess player. I've beaten multiple 2650 plus FIDE players. I think the thing that's actually been something that's been a challenge for me is actually my floor has probably been not the best. So I think the really strong players or the people that get to jam, their ceiling is one thing, but their floor is is something that's not super low. My ceiling has always been super high. Like I've beaten 2670, 2680 GMs before. I've beaten a 2650. I've beaten some 2600s FIDE players. But my floor, there's some games where I may make a string of moves that, for my strength. I mean, if I make a few moves that are 2200 level, that's not going to cut it.
So what do you think the psychological origin of this issue is, of this inconsistency is?
So I don't know if it's psychological, but I will say, from a philosophical perspective, I would say there are two types of chess players. There's the empirical chess player, the math sciencey guy. That they're the people that, they're like, oh, you play chess, you'd be great at finance, or oh, you'd be a great poker player. And then there's the camp where I lie, which is the chess philosopher. And I would say the chess philosopher is someone that, ideologically believes certain things about the way the game should be played and plays that way all the time. And my philosophy, as a chess philosopher, my ideology is war of attrition, wear the opponent down over time. If an opponent creates a weakness here and then another weakness somewhere else, eventually the edifice will collapse over 4, 5, 6 hours. And in my drive to play that way, I think I sometimes eschew decisions that would expedite a process or work in my favor. Or to put it in maybe plainer English, sometimes I will avoid sharp or tactical direction because I'm so bullish on my style.
Right.
That has been the challenge that I'm constantly having to sort of recalibrate to ensure that, I don't totally discard tactical play when it's required.
So in terms of what you need to work on to get the GM title, do you feel like you need to emphasize tactics? Like, is it a tactical ability thing or more just the psychology of not eschewing them in the moment?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. It's just sort of understanding that, there's certain forks in the road where there's the tactical choice is the better choice. And 9 times out of 10, I avoid it because I would like to sort of chart calmer waters.
Yeah. Well, sounds fixable at least.
Yeah, you'd be surprised though. Old habits really die hard.
Right. Well, as far as bad habits go, it's not the worst one, at least.
Yeah.
So what advice, Kassa, as a self-taught, super strong young player, what advice would you give to the next generation? If there's a high school kid, remind you of yourself who's maybe super into chess but doesn't have a lot of resources, like in this day and age, as opposed to, it wasn't that long ago that you were in high school, 10 years. But as we talked about before, things have already changed in terms of resources. So how would you advise someone to approach improving at chess these days?
Yeah, I think it I think it sort of depends where they are at in their process. So if they're not like an expert level player yet, I would say that this is sort of the last the next generation or so is probably the last generation where you're going to really see a lot of chess in public parks.
Wow, that just made me really sad.
I think it's true. I think, I'm actually rereading Fahrenheit 451 right now. It's baffling to just see how much of society has, sort of subverted towards walls and screens and lights and bright lights and scattered brains and like we're not really so we don't entertain the physical world enough, and I think that's a trend that you definitely see. I don't see like the older chess heads coming around into public parks to play so much 50 to 100 years from now. But I would say in the interim, there's still an opportunity where you can get a lot of free lessons just playing game after game after game in the park. And that was what my opportunity was, when I was coming up and not quite, master yet. So I would definitely say do that because playing is an invaluable teacher.
And do you think, sorry to cut you off, but just out of curiosity, do you think it has to be at the park, or could they just grind out like a zillion blitz games online?
Well, yeah, no, I actually think they can grind out blitz games online to a point. So I was just saying, getting that sort of physical experience with other people can be really valuable too. But yeah, so basically like playing in the parks or online can get you, I would say to like expert or maybe close to master. And then beyond that, I would say just consuming the free resources out there. Chessgames.com was what worked for me. I mean, you can also, actually, there are even free databases like ChessDB, or you can look at games on ChessBomb, and so many of the top at these top tournaments now, when they have these post-game analysis rooms where they actually make the players talk about their decision making. It's just free resources basically from the cream of the crop. For years and years and years, I've been looking at like Beal post-game analysis with Daniel King and the two players, or candidates tournament post-game analysis, or like, some of it is just, sheepish commentary after a draw that, they don't want to really be there. But many other times they're really injecting their passion into the game. And then of course there's probably, books that could be written. I think books are still have their place. I think history in particular chess history can be valuable. It hasn't played as prominent a role in my development, but I would say definitely looking at, the games of the, 70s, 80s, or whatever, just like 30. I don't really believe, frankly, in looking at games like centuries ago. They don't really have much chess value for your development, in my opinion. But if you're already around like expert, but if you're, in a place where you're at export, I think these games from a few decades ago are great because you familiarize yourself with different structures and knowledge, and old becomes new very quickly. So,
and do you have a favorite player that you like historically or currently?
So I think there were different periods. So I think like my favorite player, I would say, because there were periods where I liked this person and that person. I'd say the person I liked the longest was Kramnik. And I could say without a doubt that he had the biggest influence on my chess. For sure.
So what initially drew you to him?
I think, the positional play was just pristine. And, if you actually think about it, almost every opening in chess has advanced to the extent that it has because of Kramnik's work. So if you can just think about it, you think of the Petrov or the Berlin Wall. Those are the ones that people really know. But the Catalan, different lines in the Slav. He was a pioneer in so many different places where if you wanted something new or fresh, you looked at him, and the other top guys looked at him. And then I think the other thing that I liked about him is he did have this, very much so, this philosophy about the way that chess should be played, and these are sort of these micro advantages and pressing these advantages and that sort of thing. But he also sort of was able to, beautifully complement it with an empirical understanding that that I could only dream of possessing.
Yeah, he's incredible. Okay, and you mentioned that books aren't your favorite, or like weren't the most formative for you, but I think I managed to coax a book recommendation out of you last time, but I don't remember what it was. Do you have any?
Yeah. Perfect Your Chess.
Right. Yeah. Which I think Eugene Perelstein also recommended, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. Perfect Your Chess took me from 2100 to Perfect Your Chess was the book that allowed me to cross into National Master territory. It sort of unlocked so many keys for me. I don't know if you've ever seen The Matrix, and there's the key maker in the second Matrix that's like opening up all these rooms. And basically that book opened up so many possibilities that I frankly wouldn't have looked at because my eyes weren't open. And so, being a positional player, again, I would always avoid, not even really explore, because sometimes I didn't know it was there, the tactical possibility. And the way the book is structured is there basically 100 puzzles in each section. And the thing I like about it is they're puzzles from real games in the early 21st century, all GM games. So, or very strong title player games. And so these are real concrete decisions from real games. So they're not like made up puzzles. And basically the first 40 in each section were FM level, the next 40 are IM level, and then the last 20 are GM level. And it was just so difficult to get through the book and get these correct. But you stare at enough positions where you're working out really relevant and realistic, frankly, positions that could happen on the board, and you're trying to figure out, what should I do here? What's the course of action? That is what really gets you into that game mode, because it's so close to the reality that it's just great training. Most of these tactics books, if they're lower level at sack mate, if they're not, they're just not. They're not stuff where you just need to sit down and get through them. And I found with Perfect Your Chess, you look at a position for 5 to 10 minutes, you try to find out, and that sort of simulates the game, because that's what you have in the game. You have a clock that's against you. You're trying to work out a reasonable solution, and then you go forward.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed with the tactics trainers online, I don't know if this is a unique feeling to me, but when I try to solve them, I feel like more often than in a chess game, I know what the move is, and I'm just trying to figure out how it works. Or, if not that, the less severe version of that is, it's a move order thing. The theme, you just can't quite crack the move order. And that's useful for building up pattern recognition, but to me, it doesn't replicate the conditions of a game, because in a game, of course, you don't know. You don't know that the tactic works. So at some point, if you think there's something there, or you have a slight intuition that there might be, but you're not finding it, you might need to move on.
Yeah. I can definitely echo those sentiments. I seriously, Perfect Your Chess, I would strongly encourage anyone to check that out. Even if you're not at the expert level yet, you start to think about this is what real when you're playing chess, you don't know that the tactic is there, or at least it's not like when you're playing someone, there's a light bulb in your head that says, oh, this is white to play and win in 3 or something.
Right.
And so to really just work through real positions, you're not really even thinking about, finding the tactic that wins. You're just thinking about making the best move. And that's what I liked about these positions too. Okay.
Sounds good. Okay. So I have another question from a supporter of the podcast for you, Kassa. You have heard this one before, but we will ask it again. From Chip Moore. He says, I realize I don't have much hope of playing better chess, but can Kassa give any advice on how to better understand games as you're watching or playing through them? I've heard masters pay attention to squares, spaces, where lower rated players pay too much attention to pieces, and any directions he can give to enjoy watching games being played would be appreciated. So
sure. I think there's a few things. One thing I emphasize I actually do a few private lessons, and what I emphasize, no matter the level, is actually whenever you move a piece, you're moving it away from squares it was previously defending. So if you let's say in the starting position, white, it's white to move obviously, and white it plays pawn e3. Well, pushing that pawn from e2 to e3. Well, I would say that the adjacent squares of e3, d3, and f3 are no longer protected, and they're a little bit loose now. And in the case of pawns, I also say the e2 square seems a little weak because it's no longer, pawns can't go backwards, so it can't be occupied again. And I always find that immensely valuable, because the point is not that you might be able to exploit that weakening or loosening of the square right away, but that, over time, if you just keep yourself abreast of all of these developments, you're able to just sort of just do a quick check and see, like, can I take advantage of that now? No? Okay, let me look somewhere else. Can I take advantage of that now? No? Okay, look somewhere else. And that sort of always has been something that really, really helped down the line, because weak squares, really can decide games. Now, if you want to sort of step back and not be so, because that's really a very technical concept. One thing that I found, I was at the North Carolina State Scholastic Championships a few months ago, and one thing that I found is I kept a tally during the weekend to see the side that connects the rooks first. I had this theory, and I still believe it to be very much the case in games, that a lot of times the side that connects the rooks first is actually the side that wins the game. And so I kept a tally of these Scholastic players, basically, for the most part, like 1700 and below. And I want to say 80% of the games were the side that connected their rooks first won the game. And really, if you just extrapolate that, what does connecting the rooks actually mean? It means you developed your pieces and you castled, so that the rooks are touching each other, and the queen cleared itself from the back rank. So really what you're saying is you got all your pieces out, and there's a semblance of coordination. And that's really what chess is at a high level, is, making sure that everything is working in concert, so that you have this, wonderful, orchestra or team or whatever analogy you want to put out there that works. So connect those rooks.
Nice. Yeah. As my friend Donnie Ariel, IM likes to say, chess is a battle for territory. Never forget that that's what it's based on. And one other bit of advice for Chip is, in terms of if you're watching a game online, and I know that it can be daunting, especially with the engine right there in front of you. But one thing you can do is if you're watching something and maybe you don't have the commentary on, or maybe the commentary that you're watching you feel like is not really addressing the questions in your head. If someone made a move and you can't figure out why, one thing you can do is just with the engine, if you're watching on Chess24 or Follow Chess or wherever you're watching, just make like a nonsensical waiting move for the other side. Just like move king to h1 or pawn to a3 or whatever it is. And then the computer will then tell you what the next move is. So if you can't see what someone's threat is or what their plan is, that's one way that the engine can actually be a little bit of help in trying to navigate your way through what on earth is going on. Because I know when I watch Super GM games, I'm pretty lost myself. So,
yeah, that's a really great point for those that are working with the engine. I'm probably going to come off like a Luddite just by saying this, but I would say, you really, a chess player doesn't really need to even work with the engine until they're about, class A player probably, around 1800. Because I just think there's, you need to build good habits as a chess player first before you determine what the best moves are. And those habits are basically what's going to stick with you. It's almost like someone that wants to be a great point guard or whatever needs to know how to dribble first, and they need to know how to dribble with both hands, and they need to be relatively ambidextrous, and you're gonna be able to want to cross over with your left, and then if you really want to be a serious player, you're gonna want to cross over with your right, and have that fluidity. And it's building these habits that first, because the computer is almost always going to surprise you.
Yeah, I get that. Maybe we can meet in the middle. What I would say is if you spend a few minutes trying to figure it out for yourself, maybe at that point, using the engine to help you is kind of like looking at the answer of a textbook. Maybe it's not ideal, but on the other hand, if you're an adult chess fan, yes, you'd like to get better at chess, but it's not, maybe isn't your be all end all. At some point, you just want to be able to feel like you know what's going on in the game.
Oh, for sure, definitely. And just a word about engines generally. I actually really enjoy watching engine games, engine matches.
Oh yeah, this was gold when you talked about it last time. Yeah,
so basically, when we were playing human games. Well, there's a few reasons why I like engine matches. The first reason is I like to see what openings they're playing, because engines can make dubious openings or bad openings playable, and so it's really interesting to see what plans and what course of action they take in certain openings that might not be so popular, but actually prove to be fairly viable. It's also and you actually see. Sometimes the top players talk about this, this opening was, viable in this engine match, or there was some idea here. Growing up, I watched a few King's Crusher videos on YouTube where he'd analyze engine games, and even though I was probably already a bit stronger than him, I just enjoyed his commentary. It was just funny to sort of navigate these waters together as a viewer or listener.
Nice.
The second thing, and I would say is the thing that's even more important than learning about their opening habits, is actually the art of doing nothing. So in a lot of engine games, there'll be moments where essentially the computers are they're not going to offer draws the way humans do. So they might repeat moves in a really weird way for 20 or 30 moves, and you're and you see these 180 move games or 120 move games, and you're well, they just sort of shuffled the pieces for 30 moves. What was going on? And what was actually going on is the computers were able to move or make moves without compromising their position. And that's something as humans we simply aren't able to do. We just don't have the skill because we're human. We want to go forward. We want to stretch our wings,
Right.
And so I, as a player that's, very positional and slow developing games, it's immensely valuable to learn how to do something without ruining your position, how to sort of pass the move but be productive. It gets me every time.
Yeah. That's as I said last time, I have to say this time, that's something that Magnus in particular, he seems to have internalized that lesson much more so than other players. I mean, he's so famous for, just torturing people in these long end games, and he's just so incredible at squeaking out these minuscule advantages, which dovetails into the one of only a couple more topics that I want to hit before I let you go, Kassa. And thanks again for your generosity with your time. But you actually got to meet Magnus. So could you tell the story of what happened there?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to be connected to a lot of the the players in the New York City chess scene just by virtue of being around it for so long. And Russell Makovsky, who was at the time, I think there's sort of like a splitting up of the company or something happened, but NYC Chess, which he was essentially running, and he may very well still be, had Magnus Carlsen come in during the summertime and meet with some of their students and play some blitz games, and really great theater. And I wasn't a part of the NYC Chess. I hadn't had a working relationship with it, like a professional or working relationship with them or anything. But Russell was like, "Hey, you want to come by and check this out? Like, obviously, like you're a chess player. This would be a great thing to do." And I was like, "Yeah, of course, no doubt. I get a chance to just watch, just be around the guy. I mean, look at that time. I mean, I was like, I was basically like a fangirl or a fanboy at some rock concert, and with perspective, I mean, I don't have that same, fanboy, fangirl, thing about chess players. But, that time I would have dropped anything. I would have literally dropped anything to run towards that. So anyways, I didn't actually, I wasn't there to actually play any games. So I actually watched Irina Krush play a blitz game against Magnus because she was an instructor there, so they were giving some of the instructors an opportunity to play him. And she actually won the game. It was actually really cool. They played a 5-minute blitz game. Irina played her she's white and played a Nimzo Indian. I think she was a Queen C2 in Nimzo Indian player, a classical Nimzo Indian player. And I think she won the game. It was very cool. And then, he played a few other games and then left. And I actually left. This was relatively early in the day. So I was meeting up with a friend from high school and we were going to walk the High Line together. And we did. So I walked the High Line. It was about later in the day, probably like 3-4 p.m. now. And we got out the High Line and sort of started walking towards Union Square from like the meatpacking area. And, Union Square, there's just a ton of hustlers playing chess with their board set up and everything. And I was like, just being a chess player, if you see chess and you see the clocks, like it's like a wolf seeing some sort of prey. Like right. You're just going to gravitate there. Like it's just hard to avoid. And I was like, hey, my friend Michael, I was like, hey, Michael, hey, you mind me if I play a few games? And he knew the sort of the level of addiction in me that like no was not going to be like a plausible response. So he's like, sure, no problem. So I sit down, I start playing a few blitz games. I'm feeling good about myself, building up momentum. Totally ignore the fact I'm probably like hungry. And all of a sudden, Magnus and Russell walk over to basically arrive at the chess hustlers, and we're all playing, and people are playing blitz, and Magnus wants to play, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me! I just saw this guy a few hours ago, and now he's here. Like this time, I'm getting in some games. So I got to play 3 2-minute games with him, and he beat me very comfortably 2 of the 3 games, and the 3rd game I actually got the better position, but he flagged me. I told my friend Michael that day, I said, here, take a picture, and the picture to this day is like the cover photo on Facebook. On my Facebook, but I told him at the time, I was like, after that experience, I was like, Michael, this is one of the best days of my life.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I think everyone would feel that way. And I can certainly relate to the fanboy thing. I mean, it's like watching him in like the Lee Chess Arena just beat up on all these other world-class type bullet players. I mean, it's hard not to be in awe.
Yeah, it was. I was like, oh man, if only I had the time to beat him, show him what's up in basketball, because then he would have some problems. Yeah,
exactly. All right, last topic, Kassa, before I let you out of here. So it's been, I think, about 10 days since we recorded the first half of this interview. So now the U.S. Championship is going on, although we're recording this Wednesday night. So it'll basically be over by the time this comes out. But any early impressions? Have you got a chance to check it out at all?
No, actually, I've looked at a few rounds here and there, but I couldn't even say who's leading, embarrassingly enough. I will say I saw there were some games that sort of drew my attention. I was of course impressed with the way Azoria played against Caruana.
He beat Nakamura today as we record.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So I'm actually not aware of these developments, but I could tell you this much: this weekend probably I'll be hitting that right arrow key on all those chess bombs. So it's something I definitely will get to.
Yeah. I always feel bad. I wish it were declared a holiday, but now the tournaments come so fast and furious. There's so many awesome high level tournaments that I would just love to sit and watch, like, Jen and Yasser or Peter Svidler and Jan, like, announce, and just like Kosta Kavutski was saying how incredible Peter Lecoq was as an announcer. Like, I would love to just like drink that in for hours at a time, but yeah,
and the funny thing is, you can at some point, like even after the fact. I mean, you can. Chess is one of these things, right, where it's like hasn't totally like rippled into the public consciousness. So I mean, it's not like people are telling you what happened in the last round.
That's true, yeah.
Avoid it, and then you could just watch these YouTube streams, which are amazing on the when you do have the time. So it really could. It's almost like DVR or something.
Evergreen content.
Yeah. Actually, I honestly I really do want to get into the sort of like live commentary at top tournaments gig one day if someone gives me a shot.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think you'd be great at it. I mean, it's interesting because chess attracts introverts generally. I think that chess players skew towards being introverted, but I'm not just saying this as someone who's had a lot of chess announcers on this podcast, but I'm generally impressed with how well chess players are able to present their ideas because, 25 years ago, chess didn't have that reputation. I mean, there was so little coverage, but even when something made its way to some sort of broadcast or TV, I felt like ideas weren't explained very well, and now there's just so many incredible announcers. But I think you'd be great at it.
Yeah, thank you. The amazing thing about chess, and I mean, it just wakes me up. Like before this, we were talking about having this interview, and I was feeling a little lethargic, a long day at work, and we just get into talking about chess, and I have all my sensibilities back. Like I'm just so alert because it just gets you going in a way that, well, I'm looking for other things like that to get me going the same way.
Yeah. It's hard to replicate.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Kassa. This has been awesome. Once again, if you could pass along the best way for people to either, you've got a YouTube channel, so people should definitely check that out. Hopefully, as we mentioned last time, if nothing, I think people understand you're working, living and on the chess grind yourself. So if you don't put out actual content all the time, as I mentioned last time, I at least enjoy the little tournament updates that you put out and that John Bartholomew does and stuff like that. But anyway, long way of saying, what's the best way for people to reach you?
Yeah, so definitely check out the YouTube channel. There will be I do feel like I put a decent amount of content up there in the past year. I mean, I especially last year I had like 70 videos or something. So definitely a lot to pour over there. I am going to be returning back to it very soon, so I'm very much looking forward to that. Also, I can be reached via email. kassakorley@gmail.com. So just my first and last name at Gmail. I do some private lessons from time to time, so feel free to hit me up. But honestly, I mean, if you just want to have conversation too, I'm really I like to have those too. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say here, by the way, thank you to Ben, because I think what you're doing is really, really amazing. You sort of bring a credibility and and just another angle to chess culture that is really badly needed. So keep putting out the good work you're putting out.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, and I intend to. I feel the same way as you. I also am tired tonight, but yeah, once you start kicking back and talking chess, this is, as I've said before, having a podcast entails many responsibilities, a lot of which are not actually interviewing chess players, but the interviewing chess players is the part I love. So,
yeah, for sure.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again, man. And good luck chasing norms and, enjoying life.
Thank you. It will definitely be a long journey.
Special thanks goes out to my Patreon and PayPal perpetual partners. Without the generous support of the chess community, Perpetual Chess would not exist in its current form. I would like to thank Adam Vrankulj, Adrian Gutierrez, Alex Pejas, Chris Wainscott, Chad Hilton, Chris Lott, Christopher Wood, Coach J's Chess Academy, Chris Flanagan, Daniel Naylor, Daniel Schaefer, Gary Andrews, Greg Shahadi, James Bonastia, Jason Dunbar, Jennifer Valens, Jeffrey Martello, John Fernandez, Jen Shahadi, Jens Green, Jerry Wells, John Thompson, Johnny McMenamin, Kelly Palmer, Krishna Gopalakrishnan, Lorraine Dore, Matthew Passy, Macaulay Peterson, Matthew Tedesco, Pascal Charbonneau, Paul Swaney, Peter Lux, Peter Merrifield, Randall Temple, Ricky Grijalva, Rob Lazorchek, Robert Steiner, Tatyeva Abrahamyan, Thomas Stanix, Thomas Tachenko, Tim Seymour, Timothy Ha, Todd Bryant, Tony Rotella, Victor Vrankulj, Zhao Cheng, and last but not least, Zhivko Stoyanov. Thanks, everyone. I'll catch you all next week.